Terrence Whitfield had learned long ago that the world judged a book by its cover, and he had stopped caring almost entirely. He wore the same faded gray jacket every day, not because he had no other options tucked away in the closet of his small apartment on Langford Street in the Maplewood district, but because he had simply forgotten to replace it somewhere between the midnight coding sessions that stretched into the pale blue hours of early morning and his daughter's school runs that required him to be standing at the front door with a packed lunch bag and a convincing smile by 7:15 every single weekday, morning regardless of how little sleep he had gotten the night before. The jacket had become part of him, the way a second skin becomes part of a person who has worn it so long they no longer notice its presence. A garment so thoroughly integrated into his daily existence that removing it would have felt like removing a layer of identity rather than simply changing clothes. It was a practical jacket, originally purchased from a discount store on Chambers Avenue 6 years ago for $23, and it had served him faithfully through every season, every late-night walk to the corner store for milk, every parent-teacher conference where he sat in plastic chairs designed for people half his size, and every quiet Tuesday morning when the world seemed manageable enough to believe that things might eventually get better. His hands were calloused in the particular way that belongs to men who work with both physical and mental labor. The rough patches on his palms from fixing things around the apartment that a landlord should have fixed but never did, the slight numbness in his fingertips from thousands of hours spent pressing keys on a keyboard that had long ago lost the letters on several of its most frequently used buttons. His shoes were scuffed at the toe. The leather cracked along the flex points where his feet bent with each step, and they made a soft, tired sound against pavement that suggested they had carried him many more miles than they had been designed to carry. His hair never quite settled into anything that resembled intention, a thick crown of coils that he kept short because maintaining it required time and products that felt like luxuries when there were groceries to buy, and an electricity bill sitting on the counter with a red notice stamped across its face in letters that meant hurry. To most people who passed him on the street in the Maplewood neighborhood, walking past the barber shop on Grover Road and the laundromat on Tillerson Avenue and the elementary school on Winslow Drive where his daughter attended 4th grade, Terrence looked like a man quietly losing a battle he had been fighting for years. He looked tired because he was tired. He looked worn because he was worn. He looked like someone the world had chewed on for a while and then set down without bothering to apologize. What they did not see, what no one who glanced at his faded jacket and his scuffed shoes and his unsettled hair could have possibly guessed, was the battle he had already won, the invisible victory that lived in the inner pocket of that same gray jacket, folded carefully into a plain white envelope that contained a number so large it would have changed the expression on every face that had ever looked past him without seeing. Terrence was 38 years old, a single father to a 10-year-old girl named Zara, and one of the most quietly brilliant cybersecurity software architects in the country. The word quietly was important because Terrence did not operate in the world of press conferences and industry panels and glossy magazine profiles that celebrated the faces of innovation. He operated in the world of kitchen tables and late nights and the soft glow of a laptop screen in a dark apartment where the only sounds are the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the building settling, and the steady rhythmic breathing of a child sleeping in the next room who trusted that her father would still be there when she woke up, which he always was, even when being there meant he had not slept at all. 3 years ago, Terrence had been approached by a private cybersecurity firm called Meridian Shield Technologies, a company headquartered in the glass and steel canyons of downtown Thornfield that specialized in developing encryption protocols for major financial institutions. They had found him through an open-source security project he had contributed to anonymously, a piece of code so elegant and so innovative that their lead engineers had spent 2 weeks trying to identify who had written it before finally tracing it back to an anonymous account that belonged to a man living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Maplewood who did not even have a LinkedIn profile. They had sent a representative to his door, a young woman in a tailor blazer who had looked visibly surprised when Terrence answered in a t-shirt with a coffee stain on the collar and bare feet on linoleum, and she had explained that Meridian Shield wanted him to build an encryption system that would protect the financial data of millions of users across their client network of banks, investment firms, and payment processing platforms. The scope of the project was enormous. The encryption architecture they needed required a fundamental rethinking of how data moved through layered security environments, a problem that teams of engineers at much larger companies had attempted to solve and failed, not because they lacked talent, but because the solution required a kind of creative lateral thinking that could not be produced by committee. It required the mind of someone who saw patterns differently, who could hold the entire system in their head at once the way a chess grandmaster holds the board, seeing not just the current positions, but every possible future configuration extending outward into branching possibilities that most people could not follow past the second or third move. Terence could follow them all. He had always been able to follow them all. It was the gift and the curse of a mind that never stopped working, that could not stop working, that processed problems the way other people's bodies processed oxygen, automatically and continuously and without the option of simply turning it off. It was the reason he had excelled in every mathematics and computer science course he had ever taken, from the public schools of Maplewood, where the computers were so old they ran operating systems that had been discontinued before Terence was born, to the scholarship he had earned at Pemberton State University, where he had completed a double major in computer science and applied mathematics in 3 years instead of 4, because he could not slow down enough to fill the 4th year with courses that still challenged him. It was also the reason he could not sleep most nights, because the code lived in his head the way music lives in the head of a composer, constantly playing, constantly evolving, demanding attention at hours when the rest of the world had gone quiet and dark. He had worked on the Meridian Shield project alone, at his kitchen table, a rectangular surface made of particle board and metal legs that wobbled slightly on the uneven linoleum floor of his apartment kitchen, a table that served simultaneously as his workspace, his daughter's homework station, their dining surface, and the place where he sorted mail and stacked the bills he could pay on the left side and the bills he could not yet pay on the right side always taller than the left. While Zara slept in her small bedroom down the narrow hallway, her stuffed rabbit named Professor tucked under her chin and her nightlight casting a warm orange glow through the crack beneath her door, Terence sat at that table, eating cold rice from a pot he had cooked earlier in the evening and drinking black coffee that grew more bitter with each reheating, rewriting lines of code until his eyes burned and the muscles in his neck felt like they had been replaced with cables pulled too tight. And the birds outside his window began to sing their early morning songs, which was his signal to save his work, close his laptop, and start making breakfast before Zara woke up expecting pancakes or oatmeal, or at minimum a father who looked like he had slept, which required splashing cold water on his face and rehearsing a smile in the bathroom mirror until it looked genuine enough to fool a 10-year-old who was smarter than most adults gave her credit for. The firm had promised him a generous royalty agreement, a percentage of the licensing revenue generated by the encryption system he built, paid out annually based on adoption rates across their client network. It was a standard arrangement in the industry, though the percentage Terence had negotiated was higher than standard because the lead engineer at Meridian Shield, a woman named Dr. Vivian Cross, who had personally reviewed his code and recognized its brilliance, had advocated fiercely on his behalf during the contract discussions. Terence had signed the agreement without a lawyer because he trusted people, the way good men sometimes foolishly do, the way men who have spent their lives being honest assume that honesty is the default setting of the world rather than the exception to it. He had read the contract carefully, understood the terms, and signed his name at the kitchen table with a pen borrowed from Zara's pencil case because his own pen had run out of ink 3 days earlier and he had not yet gotten around to buying a new one. For 3 years, the encryption system had been quietly adopted by financial institutions across the country. It had become the backbone of secure transaction processing for 7 major banks, 14 regional credit unions, and the largest payment processing platform in the southeastern United States. It had prevented an estimated $400 million in potential fraud losses. It had been cited in 3 industry publications as a paradigm shift in financial data protection. And the man who built it still lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Maplewood and wore the same gray jacket he had been wearing since before the project began. Last Tuesday, the royalty agreement had paid out for the first time. The check arrived in a plain white envelope with no special markings, no congratulatory note, no fanfare of any kind. It was delivered by the regular mail carrier, a woman named Brenda who had been servicing the Langford Street route for 11 years and who waved at Terrence through the lobby window, the way she always did, without having any idea that the envelope she had just placed in his mailbox contained a number that would have made her drop her mail bag. Terrence had carried the envelope upstairs, sat down at his kitchen table, and opened it with a butter knife because he could not find the letter opener that Zara had borrowed for an art project and never returned. The check was for $10 million. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time, just looking at it. The paper was unremarkable, standard check stock with a blue and white pattern and the Meridian Shield Technologies logo in the upper left corner, and his name printed in the payee line in a font that was ordinary and businesslike and completely inadequate to the magnitude of what it represented. $10 million, written in both numbers and words, as if the universe wanted to make sure there was no misunderstanding about what was being offered to the man sitting in the wobbling kitchen chair in the apartment with the uneven linoleum floor. He thought about the 3 years of nights at this table, the cold rice and the black coffee and the burning eyes and the singing birds. He thought about the bills on the right side of the table, the ones he could not yet pay, and realized with a calm that surprised him that the right side would be empty after today. He thought about Zara, asleep down the hall, who had never complained about their small apartment or their limited budget or the fact that her father's shoes were held together more by habit than by structural integrity. He thought about all the mornings he had rehearsed his smile in the bathroom mirror and wondered if she had known all along that it was rehearsed and had simply loved him too much to say so. Then he folded the check carefully, placed it in his jacket's inner pocket, the pocket closest to his chest where he could feel its presence against his heartbeat, and decided to walk to Claremont National Bank on Whitaker Avenue, 2 blocks from his apartment, to deposit it. He had an account there. He had banked there for 6 years, since he moved to the Maplewood neighborhood after Zara's mother, Denise, had passed away from complications following a surgery that was supposed to be routine but turned out to be anything but. He had opened the account with an initial deposit of $214, which was all the money he had in the world at that time, and the account had never held more than a few $1,000s at any point in the 6 years since. He chose a Tuesday morning because he thought it would be quiet. He thought it would be simple. He thought he would walk in, speak to someone, hand over the check, watch the numbers change on a screen, and walk home in time to pick up Zara from school. He was wrong about all of it. The bank was cool and marble-floored, the kind of commercial interior designed to communicate stability and trustworthiness through materials that were heavy and permanent and expensive. The lighting was soft but authoritative. The furniture in the waiting area was upholstered in dark leather that creaked expensively when you sat in it. The air carried the faint scent of something floral and corporate, the olfactory equivalent of a firm handshake. Terrence walked in with his scuffed shoes and his faded gray jacket, and took a place in the queue behind 2 other customers, a woman making a withdrawal and an elderly man depositing a pension check. He waited patiently because patience was something he had in abundance, cultivated over years of waiting for code to compile and waiting for his daughter to fall asleep and waiting for the world to recognize work that was done quietly and without fanfare. When he reached the counter, a young teller named Darius with a crisp white shirt and a name tag that reflected the overhead lights looked at him with the neutral professional expression that bank tellers are trained to maintain regardless of who is standing in front of them. Terrence explained calmly that he needed to make a large deposit and would prefer to speak with a manager given the size of the amount. Darius glanced at the faded jacket and the scuffed shoes and the battered wallet Terrence had pulled from his back pocket, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression, a micro-adjustment of expectation that was so small it might have been imagined, but was not. He directed Terrence toward the manager's office at the back of the branch with a gesture that was polite but carried an undercurrent of skepticism, the way you might direct someone toward something you privately believe they will not need. The manager's office was a glass-walled enclosure that provided the illusion of privacy while remaining visible to the entire branch floor. The manager's name, according to the nameplate on her desk, was Vanessa Crawford. She was polished and precise in the way that bank managers cultivate over years of professional presentation. Her suit was charcoal gray and perfectly tailored. Her nails were manicured to a precise length. A gold pen sat beside a leather notepad on a desk, so clean it looked like it had never been used for actual work. She wore small gold earrings and a watch that was elegant without being ostentatious, and her overall presentation communicated a message that was clear and deliberate. I belong here, and I'm the one who decides who else belongs here. Vanessa tapped the gold pen rhythmically against her notepad as Terrence sat across from her and explained why he was there. The tapping was a habit she had developed over years of meetings with clients, a subtle metronome of authority that established the rhythm of the conversation on her terms. Terrence spoke clearly and without embellishment. He told her his name. He told her his account number, which he had memorized the way he memorized everything, permanently and effortlessly. He told her he had a check he needed to deposit and that the amount was significant. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his faded gray jacket, removed the plain white envelope, extracted the check, and placed it on her desk. He smoothed it once with his thumb, pressing out a small crease that had formed where the paper had been folded, and then he sat back in his chair and watched her face. He saw the exact moment she decided. It was not when she looked at the check. It was when she looked at him. Her eyes moved from the number on the paper to the man sitting across from her. And in that transit between the check and his face, a calculation occurred that had nothing to do with banking protocols and everything to do with the assumptions that people carry inside them like loaded weapons. Assumptions about who earns $10 million and what they look like and what they wear and how their shoes look and whether the gray jacket they have on is the kind of jacket worn by a man who legitimately possesses that kind of money or the kind of jacket worn by a man who is trying to pull off something he should not be attempting. Her expression shifted. It was subtle, the kind of shift that people who have practiced judgment long enough believe is invisible, undetectable, hidden behind the professional mask they wear during business hours. But Terrence saw it because he had spent his entire life noticing small changes in systems, the tiny variations that most people overlook, but that contain all the information you need if you know how to read them. A tightening around her eyes, barely perceptible, like the first hairline crack in a surface that is about to fracture. A slight pull at the corner of her mouth, downward, a movement of perhaps 2 millimeters that communicated more doubt and more dismissal